Last month, I played every CSGO Surf game I could find. We played Roblox Surf, accurate and competitive. Halo, consistent but very different from the original. Some were terrible, and others were amazing, and a few fell through the cracks. So I looked at all the comments, asked my Discord and my chat, and these are the games that we missed. The most obscure games in Surf. Tower Unite is a virtual reality game. Its intention is mostly social, with games and cosmetics, as well as this huge community browser. Their engine seems pretty flexible, like this top-down zombie shooter, and the games worked without major problems. And here is the Surf. Surf Utopia worked as expected. Ramps are slightly off, but I could tell immediately that it was alright. Surf Beginner, by far the most popular. Almost every stage was a bit off from the original. If you put them side by side, you can see the difference in layout. But then, the first unique map appeared. This was a map that I had never seen in the original Counter-Strike. Surf Ice. So here's what I noticed. Surf required you to sprint, which is weird. You cannot b-hop on flat surfaces like you can in Surf. This map in particular had a huge difficulty spike on the last stage. It starts with a weave, then a ramp that sends you flying into a tight vertical weave. This took many attempts, so much so that I had to turn on external turbines to beat it. And finally, I got it. I could tell that the mapper, whoever made the map, was surprisingly familiar with real Surf, and then created something original that works, just like Surf Studio. This map had a really helpful tutorial stage that shows you exactly which keys to press. Something like this in CSGO would be perfect, but what blew me away was the stage design on the real levels, incredibly creative. Large ramps with smooth boards. It reminds me of Surf Axel from CS, but obviously the texturing and visuals left much to be desired. The mapper was intimately familiar with Surf, with true spins and a ton of technical elements. I left Tower Unite very surprised at the quality, but here's something you would never expect. Call of Duty. In particular, COD 4. When you think of COD 4 movement, you might recall a couple of things. Jumping on existing COD 4 maps, this allowed the most skilled players to perform powerful jumps in real games. Or the more ridiculous, jumping community proper, custom-made maps and an ecosystem very similar to Surf, servers and world records. But what I missed was a far more clandestine community. Surfing remade in COD 4 as a mod. It had Utopia, it had Gloaming, which was a staple map way back in the early 2010s, and it even had Omnific. Yes, the entire map that shows off some of the graphical advantages of the engine. For example, Ramp 1 has new reflections, although the ramp is a little bit too small. The flip side is that the Surf is terrible. While you are on the ramp, you bumble around, and your inputs are slightly delayed. I had two very good surfers trying the map with me, Marksman and Dizrez, who you might know, and even they had trouble on the most basic of maps. We speculated as to what is causing the lag. In regular Counter-Strike, your movement on ramps is calculated client-side, and then sent to the server to be represented on other players' screens or what have you, while only bunny hops and teleports are done on the server. In COD 4, Surf is a server-side mod, which means you send your inputs to the server. The server calculates your position and then sends it back to you. Not great for tier 6 maps. Speaking of maps, COD 4 had several unique ones not seen in CS. For example, this beautiful underwater level. This is a sign that there were talented mappers invested in the game mode. However, the last sign of major traffic is all the way back in 2016. The final verdict. COD 4 is impressive in the selection of maps and visual quality, but ultimately suffers greatly in its gameplay and consistency. Next, Tribes Ascend. So Tribes had a classic slide mechanic that I think a lot of commenters considered Surf, but I'm going to tell you why it's not. At first, I could not get the game to run. Official high-res servers had been shut down years ago, and instead I had to use the Kalawi launcher and connect to community servers, which is alright. Only problem, you can't play if there is no one else in the lobby. Fortunately, there were a couple of tutorials for the game's slide mechanic. The first was a basic tutorial. Use a jetpack to gain height and then press the slide button to move across the ground. Converting your falling speed to horizontal speed was the key concept. This is actually the same as Surf, and I was able to try it out on a regular map. So here's the problem. It prefers that you slide pretty straight and turn very slowly in the air. In contrast, a main feature of Surf is flicking. This flicking motion can give you drastic height if necessary, a main feature of Surf, while this movement is very limited in Tribes. Moreover, very rarely are you riding the side of a mountain. Rather, you're sliding across the top. But that doesn't diminish the awesomeness of Tribe's movement, allowing for absolutely incredible fights and gunplay that rivals modern games. Closer to home, Kreedz Climbing, formerly known as KZ Mod, is a standalone for the KZ game mode in Counter-Strike. KZ is a climbing game where you have to clear large gaps, use ladders to your advantage, and even surf on certain maps. So Kreedz Climbing is a free alternative to KZ outside of Counter-Strike. What initially struck me was how comprehensive the tutorial was. It was fully interactive, broke down multiple concepts that were familiar to me as a surfer, and even featured surf. For example, it had a section where you completed a KZ course with low gravity, so 60%, but every time you completed it, it increased the gravity until you could finish on vanilla settings. Great. But here's the thing, it had real surf maps. This is Surf Exile, a classic tier 6 map from Surf. And this is one of the Forbidden Tomb maps. KZ Mod even had its own surf map called KZ Surf Crazy, which was a bit of a mess. Rather than traditional stages, this map forced you to surf to the start of each stage. This is the normal route. It's color coded for its difficulty, and the hardest route is bright red. It was probably about tier 2 or tier 3. But as you might have guessed, this is a Source game, the same as CSGO and Counter-Strike Source. It is not significantly different or better than any Counter-Strike or even Gmod. Urban Terror was sent to me by FPS God, and there were two videos. A map called Depression 5 that featured surf on the walls. The player was clearly able to ride a slanted surface. And a map called Asian J16 that features surf at the start. However, if you can't already tell, what these players are doing is insane. This game is really hard. So after downloading and making an account with Urban Terror, I tried hopping in some servers, and there were a couple problems. First, you can't pick a map. You can only cycle the server, which means I had to spend a ton of time hoping for these maps or at least ones with surf. Second problem, this game is really hard. It's somewhat similar to Quake Movement with wall jumps, which I couldn't figure out, but it felt a lot harder than regular Quake defrag, so I spent most maps failing the first jump and then quitting. However, I was able to find this slide map that had ramps. You didn't have much control, but you were able to slide. And finally, I found my first surf ramp. And you could barely ride it. From what it looks like in Asian J16, the player isn't completely in control of their height on the ramp. They can just slow their descent. You can't exactly board, ride, and flick off ramps like you're supposed to. So, the final verdict. Urban Terror Surf exists with limited functionality. Adrenaline Gamer, another game recommended to me, a Half-Life Pro mod that's completely open source. I think this is really cool, but I decided to skip this, because it's very similar to Half-Life. In fact, it should in theory be the exact same thing, which is the same story for Wolfenstein Enemy Territory. Someone in the comments claimed it had surf, and there was, from what I could tell, surfable surfaces, but this movement engine is so similar to Quake that it wasn't worth investigating too far. I played a few maps and I was absolutely terrible at them. The servers I played on had no bunny hop and really hard maps, and there were no ramps in any of them. But Wolfenstein Trick Jumping did have an avid community and still features servers. If we focused on the objective quality of each of these games, this series would look pretty bleak. Emulating the feeling of surf is extraordinarily difficult outside of the Source engine. But these games show the magic of community-made content and are a testament to the beauty we create. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck sliding those triangles.